Have you ever wondered why God allows certain people into your life, especially those who seem to hurt you the most? What if these difficult relationships are actually opportunities for deeper faith and spiritual growth? In today's episode, we'll explore how God uses the people who challenge us as mirrors, reflecting the areas in our hearts that He wants to heal and refine. Join me as we dive into how these experiences can draw us closer to God and transform our spiritual walk. So, take a deep breath, find a comfortable place to sit, and let's walk through this journey together. Welcome to the Happy Family Coach Podcast, your guide to rewriting the story of your family's legacy. I'm Danielle Alvarez-Greer, here to help you navigate the twists and turns of family life, faith, and personal growth. Get ready for practical tools, spiritual insights, and heartfelt conversations to transform your family dynamic. Welcome to the Happy Family Coach Podcast, where real-life challenges meet real solutions. Hey friends! Welcome back to the Happy Family Coach Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Alvarez-Greer, and I am truly thrilled to have you with me today. You know, there are some episodes that really stir something deep within me, and this is one of those. If you've ever felt like certain relationships in your life were more painful than they were worth, today's conversation is especially for you. In our last two series, we not only did we dive into breaking free from toxic relationships, but also the journey of healing core beliefs after breaking free from a toxic relationship. But as I've been reflecting and praying, I felt led to go even deeper, to explore what happens when those very relationships become mirrors, reflecting back the hidden parts of ourselves that God is calling us to address. We're going to unpack the mirroring effect and how even the most painful experiences can be transformed into powerful tools for God's refining and healing work in our lives. I'm going to share another personal story with you. It's Danielle's personal story time. And I want to take you on a journey that's been one of the most challenging seasons of my life. A season that brought me face to face with my own brokenness in ways I never expected. Many of you know that I've been navigating a deeply painful conflict with people who were once very close to me, people I trusted, respected, and adored. These weren't just acquaintances. These were people I considered family. It all started, innocently enough, a few misunderstandings here and there, a few unspoken expectations, and before I knew it, the relationship began to unravel. At first, I was in denial. I told myself that it was just a rough patch, that things would blow over. But then the accusations came. Words were spoken that I never imagined hearing from someone I held in such high regard. I was accused of things that cut deep, things that questioned my integrity, my character, and my intentions. The betrayal felt like a knife to the heart, and if I'm being completely honest with you, I was consumed by it. I couldn't think of anything else. I replayed the conversations over and over and over in my mind, trying to figure out where things went wrong. I wanted justice. I wanted them to see how much they had hurt me. I wanted them to feel the pain that I was feeling. There were nights I would lay in bed, unable to sleep, just seething with anger. I was angry at them for what they had done, angry at the situation that seemed so unfair, and yes, even angry at God for allowing this to happen. But in the midst of all of that, God, he really began to show me something else. It wasn't just the hurt that was consuming me. It was something deeper, something that had been buried in my heart long before this conflict ever began. As I brought my pain before the Lord, asking him, "Why, Lord, why? Why would you let this happen? How could you let them get away with this?" God began to peel back the layers of my heart, revealing a truth I hadn't been ready to face. He showed me that I was still seeking validation, approval, and trying to prove my worth, especially with these people. I realized that part of the reason their betrayal cut so deep was because I had placed so much of my value in their hands. I wanted their approval. I wanted them to see me, to affirm me, to validate that I was enough. And when they didn't, when they accused me instead, it shattered something inside of me that I had been holding on to for far too long. And the Lord knew it. He knows what you're holding on to too, and he wants to expose it. He wants to bring it to light. I began to see that the very people who hurt me the most were, in fact, mirrors reflecting parts of myself that I had been avoiding for years. Their actions, their dysfunctions, and even their brokenness were reflecting my own broken heart, my own unresolved pain, and my need for validation. And suddenly, it wasn't just about what they had done to me. It was about what God was doing in me. Let me say that again. It wasn't just about what they had done to me. It was about what God was doing in me through this difficult trial and season. There's actually one particular moment that stands out in my mind. I was having a conversation with a close friend who had walked with me through this entire ordeal. I was venting about how wronged I felt, how betrayed I was, and my friend, who is as blunt as she is loving, looked at me in the eye and said, "Danielle, what if God is using this to show you something about yourself? What if this isn't just about them?" At first, I was kind of upset. I wanted to dismiss her words. I wanted to stay in the role of helpless baby, the victim. Because let's face it, it's easier to point fingers than to look in the mirror. But those words stuck with me. They echoed in my mind and wouldn't let me go. I began to ask God, "Okay, Lord, what are you trying to show me? What in me needs to change?" And as I spent more time in prayer, more time in the Word, God began to reveal areas of my heart that I hadn't fully surrendered to Him. Areas where I was still seeking validation from others instead of finding my worth in Him. He showed me how I was still carrying old wounds from my past that had never fully healed. Wounds that were affecting how I related to others, how I responded to conflict, and how I saw myself. As much as I would like to say this was an overnight revelation, it wasn't. It was a process, a painful and humbling process of allowing God to dig deep into the soil of my heart and pull out all of those roots of bitterness, anger, and unforgiveness. And it wasn't just about removing those things. It was about replacing them with His truth, His love, and His grace. I began to see that God wasn't just interested in healing the surface level pain caused by this particular conflict. He really wanted to go deeper. He wanted to heal the deeper wounds that had been festering for years, wounds that I had tried to cover up and ignore. And as I allowed Him to do that, something incredible began to happen. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me started to lift. The desire for revenge began to fade. And in its place, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. A peace that could only come from knowing that God was in control, that He was working all things together for my good, even this painful situation. God was using this conflict not just to refine my character, but to draw me closer to Him, to teach me to trust Him in ways I never had before, to show me that He is my defender, He is my healer, and my source of strength. And through this process, I learned that people who hurt us the most can be the very tools that God uses to shape us into the image of Christ. This journey, of course, is still ongoing. There are still days when the old feelings of anger and hurt try to creep back in, but now I'm quicker to bring those feelings to God and to ask Him what He's trying to teach me, to trust that He is working in ways I can't always see. And my prayer for you as you listen to this episode is that you would begin to see the difficult relationships in your life, not just as sources of pain, but as opportunities for growth, for healing, and for deeper intimacy with God. Okay, now that we've walked through the pain and revelation of personal conflict, let's dive into something that I believe is both powerful and challenging, the concept of mirroring. It's not a new idea, but it's one that has profound implications for our spiritual and emotional growth. And trust me, I know it's not always easy to face. So let's talk about the mirror metaphor, which is a way for us to reflect our own hearts. This idea of mirroring has been around for quite some time, both in psychology and in our faith. In the world of psychology, particularly in relationships, mirroring is when our interactions with others reflect back our own internal states, our emotions, thoughts, and even our behaviors. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing not just your face, but your heart. Carl Jung, a well-known psychologist, talked a lot about the shadow self, those parts of us that we don't always want to admit are there. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Isn't that so true? There's a lot of scripture like that. In Christian counseling, we see this idea of mirroring through the lens of sanctification, that lifelong process where God shapes us into the image of Christ. I love how Tim Keller puts it. He said, God uses difficult relationships in your life to make you more like Jesus. If He's allowing it, He's going to use it. That is so comforting, right? I mean, isn't it? Just think about that. To know that even the hardest relationships have a purpose in God's hands. But let's get something straight. Mirroring isn't about blaming ourselves for someone else's bad behavior. It's not about saying, they hurt me, so it must be my fault. No way. No way, Jose. It's about recognizing that in every painful interaction, there's a chance to see something in ourselves that we might have missed. Maybe it's an old wound, a defense mechanism, or a fear that's been lurking in the background. It's God's way of saying, hey, let's work on this together. But before we even start looking in the mirror, we have to make space for something that's so important, and that is lament. Lament is about bringing our pain, sorrow, and grief to God, and it's something we see all throughout the Bible, especially in the Psalms. David, a man after God's own heart, was no stranger to lament. He often cried out to God in his pain, asking, "How long, O Lord, and why have you forgotten me?" Psalm 13, verse 1, and Psalm 42, verse 9. Lament is where we pour out our hearts to God, where we tell Him, "This hurts, and it's not okay, Lord. I'm in pain. This suffering is heavy. I can't do it. It's too heavy. I need help." It's crucial that this part of this lament, this part of before looking in the mirror, we need to lament. We can't rush past this step. You can't jump straight into self-reflection without first allowing yourself to grieve. If you're in the thick of your pain right now, I encourage you to take that time to lament. Let God hold you in your grief. Cry out to Him and know that He hears you. And then when you're ready, we can move forward into reflection. Here's actually a guided reflection. Here are some questions to help you uncover what the mirror might reveal. If you are ready to go deeper, if you have taken the time to lament, let's walk through some questions together. Find a quiet spot, grab a journal, or just sit with these thoughts. But remember, this isn't about beating yourself up. It's about growth and healing. Let's look at a first question where I want you to recall a recent conflict. So think about a recent conflict or painful interaction with someone who has hurt you deeply. It might still be fresh, or maybe it's a wound that's been lingering for quite some time. Second question, what were your initial reactions? What were your immediate emotional responses? Was it anger, defensiveness, hurt? Or maybe you felt indifferent. What thoughts ran through your mind? What words did you say? Or what words did you wish you had said? The third question, identify your triggers. What exactly triggered those emotions? Was it something they said or did? Or was it more about how they made you feel? Unimportant, misunderstood, rejected, shamed? Try to pinpoint what set off your internal alarms. Question 4, what did this conflict reveal about your own heart? Okay, this is where we really start to look in the mirror. What did this conflict reveal about you? Did it bring up old wounds that haven't fully healed? Did it expose a fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, or fear of failure? Did it reveal a need for validation? How about for approval or control? Question 5, are there unhealthy coping mechanisms or defense strategies at play? Did you find yourself falling into old patterns, maybe withdrawing, lashing out, people-pleasing, or trying to prove your worth? What are the coping strategies you use when you feel threatened or hurt? Are these strategies healthy, or do they keep you stuck in a cycle of pain? And the 6th question, what might God be inviting you to surrender? What might God be inviting you to surrender in this situation? Is it your need for approval, your desire for revenge, or maybe a deeply rooted fear? What would it look like to bring this before God and ask Him to help you let go? Ask Him to help you surrender it. Let me share a story from one of my counseling sessions that illustrates how this mirroring process can play out in real life. I'm all about practical application, so I try to do that often through my podcast with you all. This case involved a conflict between two sisters, both believers, who were deeply involved in their church. We'll call them Sarah and Emily. As sisters, Sarah and Emily had always had a close relationship, but things started to unravel when they found themselves on opposite sides of a disagreement within their church. Emily felt that Sarah wasn't supporting her and instead was siding with others who had hurt her. Sarah, on the other hand, felt that Emily was being overly sensitive and unreasonable, refusing to see the bigger picture. Their once strong bond became strained, and they started avoiding each other, which caused ripples in both their family and church community. When Emily first came to me, she was overwhelmed with feelings of hurt and betrayal. Her heart was super heavy, and before we could dive into any self-reflection, we needed to create space for her to express her grief. I knew she needed compassion and empathy in that moment. She needed to know that her pain was valid and that it was okay for her to cry out to God. So we started by learning how to lament together. I encouraged her to pour out her heart to the Lord, just as we see David do in the Psalms. We read Psalm 13 together, where David cries, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" I let her know that it was okay to ask those hard questions and to bring her sorrow and anger before God. I reminded her that lament is not a lack of faith, but an act of faith, trusting that God hears us in our pain. So as Emily began to express her hurt and frustration, she experienced the release that comes from being fully honest before God. Through tears, she laid her brokenness at his feet, and I had the privilege of sitting with her in that space, offering empathy and compassion without rushing her toward resolution. Only after she had fully lamented and grieved did we move into the next step of the process, which is reflection. Once the Holy Spirit helped me to discern she was ready, and once Emily had given herself permission to lament, we began to walk through the guided reflection questions. Emily reflected on her conflict, again with Sarah, initially focusing on the hurt and feeling of betrayal. But as we worked through the questions, she began to uncover deeper issues. Emily realized that her sister's actions had triggered something in her that went beyond this specific situation. She identified a deep-rooted fear of rejection, one that she had carried since childhood, where she often felt overshadowed by her sister Sarah. Through this reflection, Emily saw that much of her anger wasn't just about Sarah's behavior, it was tied to her need for validation and approval. She realized that she had been placing a heavy expectation on Sarah to affirm her decisions and make her feel secure. But when Sarah didn't provide that validation, it left Emily feeling vulnerable and unloved. How many can relate? I can. Together, we explored what God might be inviting Emily to surrender. It became clear that God was asking her to let go of her need for Sarah's approval and instead rest in the truth that her worth and security come from Him alone. As difficult as it was, Emily started to release her expectations of her sister and shift her focus toward trusting in God's love and acceptance. And again, just to remind you, this was not an easy or quick process. It took place over many one-on-one biblical counseling and family coaching sessions. But the entire process was truly transformative. By starting with lament, we acknowledged the pain. By working through the mirroring process, Emily uncovered the deeper issues in her heart that God was lovingly revealing to heal. Eventually, she was able to approach Sarah not from a place of demanding validation, but from a place of peace, a place of understanding and grace. So I shared this story with you because it highlights the powerful steps of lament and reflection. Lament allows us to bring our honest pain before God, and then reflection helps us see what He's doing in the depths of our hearts. In your own relationships, remember that God is always at work, even in the midst of conflict. He uses these difficult interactions to refine us and draw us closer to Him. In Genesis 8, verse 21, we find this profound moment where God, after the flood, makes a promise that resonates deeply with all of us. He says, "Even though everything they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood, I will never again destroy all living things. Okay, can we just pause for a moment and take that in? Our amazing God, Abba Father, Yahweh, who knows the depths of our hearts, our inclinations, and our messes, he looks at us, he looks at humanity, and he chooses mercy time and time again over judgment. He sees our brokenness, but instead of wiping the slate clean again, he makes a commitment to transform us rather than destroy us. Let's be real for just a second. We all have this bent toward evil. As the scripture says, it's not just about doing bad things. It's about those deep-seated inclinations we all wrestle with, like the need for control, the desire to protect ourselves at all costs, or that lingering anger that can bubble up when someone crosses us. We've all been there, right? This isn't a new concept. Theologians have talked about it for centuries. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, emphasized that since the fall, every single one of us is born into a state of brokenness. We're bent, tilted towards sin, and it colors everything we do. Jeremiah even puts it bluntly in Jeremiah 17, verse 9, where he says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" That right there is some tough truth, but it's so real. But here's where it gets amazing. Even with this deep-seated tendency towards sin, God's response isn't to toss us aside. Instead, he leans in with a plan for transformation. In Genesis 8, verse 21, God makes this incredible choice. He acknowledges our flaws, but he promises not to destroy us. Instead, he sets the stage for a different kind of intervention, one that involves changing us from the inside out. God's mercy isn't passive, it's active, it's purposeful, and it's all about transformation. Think about the flood for a second. It wasn't just a reset button, it was a cleansing, a way to start anew. And in our lives, toxic relationships and painful experiences can feel like mini floods, right? These mini floods, they wash over us, sometimes leaving us feeling wiped out. But if we let God work, those very floods can be what cleanse our hearts, what strip away the old, what strip away the unhealthy patterns, and make way for new growth. John Calvin, another theological giant, had this great insight about our hearts. He said, "The human heart has so many crannies where vanity hides, so many holes where falsehood works, is so decked out with deceiving hypocrisy that it often dupes itself." That's a fancy way of saying we often can't see our own mess. We need God to hold up a mirror, to use those tough relationships or trials to show us what's really going on inside. The Bible, we have God's Word. It's full of stories where God uses trials to transform his people. Take Joseph, for example. His brothers threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and he ended up in prison for something he didn't even do. Talk about a series of floods. But God, behind the scenes, was at work the whole time, shaping Joseph's character, preparing him for a greater purpose. When Joseph finally faced his brothers years later, he told them, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." You can find that in Genesis 50, verse 20. That right there is transformation. God taking the worst and turning it into something redemptive. And then, of course, there's Paul. He had this thorn in the flesh, some kind of ongoing struggle that kept him humble. In 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 through 10, he shares how God's grace was enough for him, how in his weakness, God's strength was made perfect. That's the power of transformation. God working through our trials, through those painful relationships to make us more like Jesus. And here's the heart of it all. God doesn't just want to point out what's wrong in us. He wants to heal it. He's all about restoration. Romans 2, verse 4 tells us that God's kindness is meant to lead us to repentance. It's his patience, his relentless love that gives us space to change, to grow, to be transformed. So as we reflect on this promise in Genesis 8:21, let's remember that God is always at work, even in the messiest parts of our lives. He's not interested in leaving us in our brokenness. He's in the business of healing, of making us whole, of transforming us into the image of his Son. And that's something worth leaning into, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. So we've talked about how God uses painful relationships as mirrors, revealing areas in our lives that need healing and growth. But you might be wondering, okay, Danielle, how do I actually engage with this mirror in a way that leads to real change? Let's walk through some practical steps that have helped me, and I believe they can help you too. The first step, surrender your pain to God. First things first, take that hurt and lay it down before the feet of God. And not just once, but as many times as you need to. If you're anything like me, that desire for justice can flare up at the most unexpected moments. I'd catch myself replaying conversations in my head, thinking about what I should have said, or wishing that God would just step in and set things right for me. But here's the thing. Surrendering isn't about giving up. It's about handing over control to the one who sees the whole picture. I remember reading The Hiding Place, one of my favorite books. Actually, it's a book that I read when I became a new baby believer, a baby Christian. The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, where in this particular part of the book, she describes the process of forgiving the man who betrayed her family to the Nazis. It wasn't a one-time deal. Corrie had to keep surrendering her anger and pain to God over and over again. She said, forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. That really struck me, still strikes me today because it's so true. Sometimes we have to choose to surrender even when our hearts are still hurting. Our flesh does not want to surrender, especially when we're hurting. But when we do this, when we surrender, when we lay our pain before God, we're not just letting go. We're making room for God to work. We're saying something like, God, I trust you to be the ultimate judge. I trust your timing, even when it doesn't make sense to me right now. I fully surrender this person, this relationship, this hurt over to you, Lord. The second step, pray for those who hurt you. Now, I will be the first one to say, I know this one is tough. Praying for the people who've hurt us can feel like the last thing we want to do. But here's what I've learned. Prayer isn't just about changing them. It's about changing us. Jesus calls us to this radical love in Luke 6, verses 27 through 28. He says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. This isn't about being passive or ignoring the wrongs done to us. It's about opening our hearts to God's transformative work. When we pray for those who have hurt us, something powerful happens. Bitterness starts to lose its grip. Our hearts begin to soften, not in a way that excuses their behavior, but in a way that frees us from carrying the burden of hate. It's like what Anne Lamott said, not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. Holding on to that bitterness only harms us. So start small. Even if all you can muster is, God, help me to want to pray for them. That's a start, believe it or not. And as you continue, you might find that God begins to shift your heart in ways you never expected. A third practical step is to look in the mirror and ask God what He's showing you. This is where the rubber meets the road. After you've surrendered your pain and started praying for those who hurt you, it's time to ask the hard questions. God, what are you showing me through this? What in my heart needs your healing touch? This isn't about blaming yourself for someone else's actions. It's about recognizing that God often uses difficult people and situations to reveal things in us that we might otherwise ignore. Maybe it's an unhealed wound, an unhealthy coping mechanism, or a pattern of thinking that needs to be renewed. I remember working with a counselee who was struggling with a deep sense of rejection after a falling out with a close friend. As we prayed and reflected together, she realized that the rejection she felt wasn't just about this one friend. It was tied to a deeper wound from her childhood, where she never truly felt accepted. That realization didn't come easy, but it was a turning point. She began to see that God was using this painful relationship to bring healing to a much older, much deeper wound. Practical step number 4, release the person, set boundaries. Forgiveness does not mean you let someone keep hurting you. It's about releasing them from your desire for revenge and trusting God to deal with them in His way and His time. But that doesn't mean you become a doormat. Setting healthy boundaries is crucial. Boundaries, as I've said time and time again, are like fences. They protect what's valuable, which in this case are your heart, your peace, your relationship with God, while still allowing you to engage with others from a place of strength and security. As Christian author Henry Cloud puts it, boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. They help you protect your heart and move forward in freedom. If someone continues to be toxic or abusive, it's okay to step back. It's okay to say, I forgive you, but I can't allow this behavior in my life anymore. Boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about creating space for healing and growth for both you and the other person. Practical step 5, trust in God's refining process. Finally, and this might be the most important step, trust in the process. The Bible talks about how God refines us like gold, putting us through the fire to purify us. You can find that in Malachi 3, verse 3. It's not always a pleasant process, though, but it's necessary for our growth. When we're in the midst of a painful situation, it's so easy to focus on the heat, on the discomfort. But if we can just shift our focus to what God is doing in us through that fire, it changes everything, I promise. We start to see that these trials are making us more like Jesus, to be more patient, more loving, more resilient. C.S. Lewis said it beautifully. He said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Sometimes God uses our pain to get our attention, to wake us up to something He wants to change in us. So, As you walk through these 5 practical steps, surrendering your pain, praying for those who hurt you, looking in the mirror, setting boundaries, and trusting God's refining work, remember that you're not alone in this. God is with you. He's guiding you, He's holding you, and He's transforming you every step of the way. If you're finding yourself in the middle of a toxic relationship right now, or dealing with a hurt that someone close to you has caused, I want to take a moment to speak directly to your heart. I want you to know this. God sees you. He sees the pain that you're carrying. He sees the weight of the brokenness you feel, and He's right there with you, even in the mess. I know how overwhelming it can be when the people who should be the safest turn out to be the ones who hurt us the most. It's easy to feel lost, angry, or even abandoned. But here's the truth I want you to hold on to. God is not asking you, He's not asking you or me to fight this battle alone. He's not expecting you to muster up the strength to overcome your emotions or to somehow fix your broken heart all by yourself. Instead, God is inviting you into something so much deeper and so much more beautiful. He's inviting you to trust Him, to trust that He knows exactly what you're going through and that He's already at work, even in ways you can't see yet. He's the master craftsman, and right now, He's using even the pain from these relationships as tools to refine you, to mold you, and to bring you to a place of healing and freedom. When you look in that mirror and you see your own brokenness reflected back at you, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed, maybe even a little scared. But I want you to remember this, that reflection is not there to condemn you. It's not there to shame you or make you feel like you're too far gone. No, that would be from the enemy. That reflection is a precious opportunity. It's an invitation from God to step into a place of deeper healing. Think about the story of Peter in the Gospels. After denying Jesus 3 times, Peter was shattered. He saw his own fear, his own failure, staring back at him in the harshest light. But Jesus didn't leave him in that place of brokenness. After the resurrection, Jesus sought Peter out. He restored him and gave him a new purpose. In John 21, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Mirroring the 3 denials. But each time, Jesus was not only restoring Peter, but also refining him, preparing him for the great work ahead. Just like Peter, God is using your current situation not to break you, but to build you. He's stripping away the layers of hurt, fear, and insecurity that have kept you from fully stepping into the identity He's called you to. It's not an easy process, and it's okay to feel the weight of that. But take heart. God is doing something beautiful in you. Remember what C.S. Lewis said. We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be. It's in these hard moments that God's best work is often done. He's not just healing your wounds, He's transforming your heart. He's turning the ashes of what was lost into something breathtakingly beautiful. So as you go forward, know that you're not alone. God is with you right now, right in the middle of the mess. He's holding your hand, guiding you through each step of the process, and promising that there's a purpose in your pain. Your story isn't over. Far from it, actually. It's being rewritten into something glorious. And if you ever need a reminder, just look at that mirror again. Not as a reflection of your flaws, but as a reflection of God's grace at work in your life. He's not finished with you yet. He's just getting started. And what He's building is more incredible than you could possibly imagine. Before we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with something extra that I believe will really help you on this journey. If today's conversation resonated with you, if you're in a place of pain, conflict, or wrestling with what you see in the mirror, I've created a special resource just for you. I'm excited to announce that I'll be releasing a free downloadable ebook on October 2nd. This isn't just any book. It's a workbook designed to guide you through these challenging experiences step by step, from the initial moments of lament, where you bring your pain before God, through the mirroring process we've talked about today. This ebook will help you reflect on what God is revealing, process the results, and ultimately finish by giving God the glory for everything He's taught you. This special ebook is my gift to you, a simple tool to help you continue the work we've started together here on this podcast. Whether you're dealing with betrayal, rejection, or trying to navigate difficult relationships, this workbook offers practical steps and spiritual encouragement to help you move forward in healing and growth. You can find the link to download this free booklet in the show notes on Apple Podcasts. I pray this resource will be a blessing to you as you seek to honor God through even the hardest seasons of life. And if you feel that you need more personalized guidance, I'm also here for you. You can also book a one-on-one session with me where we can dive deeper into your specific situation and work together to find the healing and freedom God has for you. Just head over to my website, happyfamilycoach.com, or check the Apple Podcast show notes on this episode for more details on how to schedule a session. So, make sure to check out the show notes for this episode on Apple Podcasts. Grab your free copy of the ebook and consider booking a session if you need that extra support. Let's keep walking this path together, one step at a time, trusting that God is with us and that He is using every moment to shape us into what He's called us to be. I can't wait to hear how these resources help you in your journey. Until next time, remember, you are not alone and God is doing something beautiful in your life. God bless you all.